month of STEMfest. Our STEMfest Cafe tonight is the science behind haunted houses with Paul Kassel, Dean of NIU's College of Visual and Performing Arts, and Jim Langley, science and lighting designer and retired theater professor. Our STEMfest Cafe is brought to you by NIU STEAM and the Center for P20 Engagement at Northern Illinois University. I'm Dr. Judy Diamond, organizer of the STEM Cafes for the past 8 years and your host for this evening. NIU STEAM refers to science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math. STEM Cafes are fun, casual gatherings where adults can eat, drink, and chat with STEM professionals about hot topics and the latest research. We usually hold our STEM Cafes in restaurants, and we certainly look forward to getting back to those restaurants. Tonight you will need to supply your own beverages and snacks and favorite carryouts. But in the meantime, Fatty's Pub and Grill, one of our partner restaurants, is offering you a 10% discount if you order something from them and that you mention that you have attended our STEMfest Cafe. And as I said, this STEMfest Cafe is part of our month-long celebration of STEM. I would like to share a little bit of information about that. We have been for the entire month holding about 12 events since we were not able to have our STEMfest in the Convocation Center, but our big bash is going to be October 31st. So if you go onto NIU's website and put in STEMfest, you'll get the entire schedule and you'll see what we have in store for you on Saturday. We are going to be having 4 virtual rooms full of events. So I hope that we see you there. You can get that full schedule when you go to that site. By the way, if you experience difficulty hearing tonight, if you go into the upper left-hand corner of your screen, you can adjust your own volume. So you might want to do that. Also, in case you have any difficulty and if you fall off of this, and we certainly hope that you can stay with us the entire time, but we are recording this. We have 2 speakers this evening. I wanted to share also with you that you can connect to us on social media to get updates about STEMfest and all of our other programs. We are gearing up right now for STEAM Studio. It's our after-school program that will begin in November. We also are starting up some teen STEM cafes in DeKalb in partnership with the DeKalb Public Library. If you email me, I will gladly share information, or if you call the DeKalb Public Library, they can give you information. We certainly need some student leaders for our teen STEM cafes. More information will be coming out about it, and it will be advertised both at NIU through our Facebook pages and through our website, and also at the library. You can get a limited edition of our STEMfest 2020 t-shirt at oltstore.com. Is there a problem with my picture? Is everything working? Those of you that are watching? Can you hear me still and see me? Okay, I'm sorry. Anyway, you can get STEMfest 2020 t-shirts at oltstore.com. We encourage you to complete a STEMfest evaluation. You can find it on our website under STEMfest 2020 eval, and it's also on this slide that you have been seeing rotate. Tell us what you think about our month of STEMfest. We would really like to know. I also want to thank our sponsors for supporting STEMfest. We could not have this free family celebration of STEM this entire month without their support. And we have listed on the persons that are or companies that are supporting us. So let's begin. Tonight's virtual STEM Cafe is the science behind haunted houses with Paul Kassel, Dean of NIU College of Visual and Performing Arts, and Jim Langley, scene and lighting designer and retired university professor. As I said before, it will be recorded. Just to make sure that everybody knows what our format's going to be this evening, each of our speakers will speak from anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes, and when they're finished, we'll give you a few minutes to write in comments. You could actually write in comments the whole time, and I know that our speakers will be watching those comments and questions, and so depending on what it is, they may answer the question as they are doing their presentations. Following their presentations, we're going to give you a few minutes, as I said, to write in some questions, and then we will answer those questions and comments, and we will end at 8 p.m. or whenever we don't have any comments anymore. And so now we'll introduce our speakers. Our first speaker tonight is Paul Kassel, Dean of the College of Visual and Performing Arts and full professor in the School of Theater. As Dean, he manages the operation of the schools of art and design, music and theater, and dance, and oversees the operations of the NIU Museum and the Community School of Arts. He came to NIU in 2016 from the State University of New York, New Paltz, where he was interim dean for the School of Fine and Performing Arts and professor of theater arts from 2004 to 2016. From 1998 to 2004, he taught acting, voice, movement, directing, and directed plays. At Bradley University, he was head of acting from 1993 to 1998. He has written books and spent 11 years as a professional actor, director, and writer in New York City, on and off Broadway, in regional theaters, and in several films and television shows. He is a theater artist by trade, a professional actor, director, and playwright. But what you really want to know about Dean Kassel is that he played villains and victims, and he has directed both violent and fright material, so he knows how to scare an audience. And Jim Langley, our second speaker, is Dean Kassel's colleague from Bradley University, all the way from Las Vegas, and guess where we'd love to be right this minute. We all wish we were there. He is a theater designer and makes the world what the world and playwrights imagine. He makes it real. But Jim also has a long and deep affection for monsters and monster movies, so he knows all the tricks from fake blood to how to chop off someone's head without really doing so. Jim taught at Boise State University, Bradley State University, Central University of Iowa, and Twin Falls High School. He has had countless freelance design and technical assignments for theaters and universities across the country. Together, Dean Kassel and his former colleague, Jim Langley, created wonderful effects, all of which involve science, engineering, and chemistry. When they combine their expert knowledge of human behavior with their knowledge of constructing the spooky world, they can scare the pants off of you. Let's hear first from Dr. Kassel and then from Jim Langley. You will be able to write in your comments as they talk and engage in conversation. I'm going to ask Paul to begin.
Hi, everybody. Are we there? Good to see you all, or virtually anyway. Thank you for participating in this, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of your questions. So first of all, I need to correct the record. I'm not a doctor, though I have, in fact, played one on television. I have had a minor professional career, but I found my way into teaching, and I've loved it ever since. So I'm grateful to be here. Can we have our first slide of my presentation? One of the things that's important to know is that I'm not a scientist, though I love the sciences. I was going to be a physics major when I first started in college. I'm really interested in the play of energy between things, mostly people. Whether it's a subatomic or the galactic level, the physics and the play of energy is exactly what the theater game is about. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the theater game of haunted houses and the idea of how you can scare an audience. And the idea is that these are immersive experiences. The haunted house itself, if many of you have been in one, you enter the house, it's a total experience, both whereas opposed as in a theater, you sit back and you watch the show, and in a haunted house, obviously you go through it, either walking through or driven through in a car or what have you. But that immersion is critical to creating the scare. In a similar vein, the movies can create a really stimulating world too, and with all the tricks that movies can do, that's why you see a lot more scary movies than you do see scary plays, though I will talk about one. Are we going to get my presentation up there, or shall I share my screen? I don't see it.
Hi, Paul.
Anyway.
It is up there, so you should be able to see it.
Oh, it is. I just don't see it.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right, we'll.
Yeah, I see that Adobe Presenter spinning around and around and around, and
okay.
I'm not seeing the slide.
All right, you might have.
Is that something I have to
internet
change?
Access. All right, so just. Roz will move.
All right, so are we on the second?
Yeah, Roz will.
Can we go to second slide?
There we go.
All right, so the second slide, you should see a flying monkey and the scary teeth. Now, I want to talk, besides immersion, one of the things that is important in creating a scare and why people are scared is things that are strange. So a monkey, we tend to associate that with something cute, but the teeth obviously are bared and look really dangerous and threatening, and then the wings make it strange. So the idea of strangeness is really important in disorienting the audience or the participant in a haunted house. So, but all of this is based on neuroscience, the science of behavior and evolution. So one of the first principles of evolution, there are 4 basic behaviors that we all instinctually have, all creatures. The urge to fight, the urge to flee, to run away, the urge to eat, and then there's a 4th urge, which I'm sure you've heard about, procreation. But we're going to focus on the fight and flee urges because that's where really the science and the art of scaring an audience come together. So inside each of those sort of elaborate suites of behavior, because fighting and fleeing are complicated sets of behavior, is really a simple impulse: approach or withdraw. And we tend to approach things that look like opportunities, and we withdraw, move away from things that appear to be a threat. And what's interesting is we do this without thinking. And because through evolution, we've developed these suites of behaviors that help us survive. Adaptations occur over time in order to enhance survival or fitness. And just by a side note, Darwin never said survival of the fittest. That was somebody else, but it's attributed to him. But of course, most of you should know who Charles Darwin is, and if you don't, please Google him and look him up. And he and another fellow were very involved in discovering the principles of evolution. So these very simple behaviors of approach or withdrawal happen in the theater all the time. They're happening constantly right now. We tend to approach things that appear to be opportunities either to satisfy urges or satisfy our curiosity. Ooh, what's that thing? Well, it looks like a delicious cupcake, and then it explodes in your face and you're surprised. We'll get to that in a minute. But those approach tendencies are what draw a person into the theatrical environment, and in case of a haunted house, in the immersive environment. There's something curious that we're drawn in. Usually in a haunted house, there's something that draws you in. Either you're forced to go in because it's a ride, or a door opens. And a door opens, or a threshold, is something that we often look for protection and to get away from the elements. And so that actually is a prompt for us to approach. But of course, in a haunted house, we're not sure if this approach is safe. Then this goes back to our most primitive behaviors in the beginning of humanity and even prior to our species as well. So in opposition to that is withdrawal. Whenever we see something that it looks like a threat, if it appears to be a snake or something jumps out, we move back quickly or slowly to withdraw from the threat so we can maintain safety. It's a perfectly natural reaction. So of course, scares are based on a lot of creating the illusion of a threat, like something is going to jump out of a closet. And so everyone's seen the movie Scream or seen scary movies, or if you haven't, you really ought to, just from a scientific point of view, to see how they play on behavioral cues. The audience knows that this person walking towards that scary door should never walk to that scary door. That's part of the fun. We're like, no, don't do it. We know more than they do, which urges us to approach. Like, don't do it. Don't go there. We're approaching. And then, bang, the door opens and we're thrown back. Because even though we know that's going to happen, because of this thing, a neural gap. That's not the scientific term. There is a scientific term for it. But there's a gap of time between when your instincts respond to a stimulus and when you are conscious of the decision to move. Now, we have reflexive behavior, of course. So flinch is a reflexive behavior. But the suite of behaviors that we call fighting or fleeing, those are larger behaviors. And usually they have to come into conscious decision. You have to decide to run away. But there is a time gap. It's very small, but it's still there and significant between when you consciously decide to run away, but already your body is behaving physiologically. It's starting to create the runaway behavior. And it's that gap that the artist exploits, whether it's creating an environment like the haunted house or a theater, which I'll get to in a little bit. So that neural gap, that time lag between my instinctive behaviors and my conscious behaviors is what we want to exploit. So again, going back to the trope, the cliche of going down a dark, scary corridor, you watch in the movie, you watch usually the young woman, or it could be a young man, approaching what appears to be a door. We know the killer's behind the door. We're approaching, don't go, and then bang, the door opens and we're scared. And so the next idea and the kind of emotions that they play on are these what we call negatively valenced emotions that feel negative, though they all have very strong purposes. So the main is fear, and fear stems from I don't know what to do. Often in a fear we freeze. Rather than fight or flee, we freeze. We don't know what to do because we're short-circuited. And that's where we get back to the idea of strangeness. We don't know how to assess the threat or opportunity of the thing that's happening in front of us. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I don't know what to do. And often, if we are really frightened, we'll freeze in hope that the predator will go by us. You'll see this often. I see it almost every day when I go running on the Prairie Path in Geneva, where I live. And you see the little bunnies, and I'm running along. The bunny will just totally freeze, be absolutely still, and try to sort of disappear into stillness to avoid detection. We do that too. So what a movie does and what a haunted house does is play on those three impulses: to run away, to fight, or freeze. And it's that freezing that you don't know what to do, in which the scare can really cascade and take an effect. So the other elements are surprise and, of course, disgust. Now, disgust is an interesting emotion, and many haunted houses play with that idea of disgust. And you see it in horror movies as well, where you see the head chopped off and the blood is spurting, or the guts are out. If everyone's seen Night of the Living Dead, and they tear the guts out of the person and they're eating the intestines, it's so nasty. And that disgusting feeling, we tend to withdraw from that as well. So all these strong emotions, fear, surprise, and disgust, work towards our threat behaviors, our urges to withdraw. So then it becomes important for the theater artist or the haunted house artist or whoever the person is to think about the senses and how we want to evoke those senses in order to prompt scare and to prompt the behaviors. But here's the crucial fact. It can't be actually real. Somewhere, and this is what goes back to the gap, we have to feel like it's not real, that it's safe. Now, if you take a 5 to 7-year-old child to one of these movies, they will freak out, most of them anyway, because they can't differentiate between what is a real threat and what is an illusion, a pretend threat. This goes to our notion of play, which is a really interesting and not a fully understood behavioral form that arises out of mammals and birds, and even there's some say that even insects display some play behavior, though it's very, very difficult to know, and we're still we still have lots of studying to do about the whole notion of play. But play is a kind of pretend. We create an imaginary world. This is what we do as human beings. We create an imaginary world in which you're it and I'm not it, and you're trying to tag me. That's imaginary. We pretend. We assume roles. So that very same principle of pretend is built into the haunted house and our understanding of how we engage our energy. So when we're pretending to fight, we horse around and we pretend to hit each other, but we really don't. But as soon as someone really smacks you, you're hurt and the game stops and you stop pretending. You're like, what the heck did you do that for? So that notion of pretend is very important. And when you're going through a haunted house or watching a scary movie or sitting in a scary play, the idea is we get very, very close as we possibly can, to the gap between pretend and real. And that's where it's really exciting. Now, those of us who are really sophisticated or have seen a lot of scary movies, and even the movie Scream does this, and we were just watching it the other night, it plays on the cliches. Everyone knows that this is going to happen, so we think we're all smart. But the fact is, our instincts will always trump these kind of intellectual exercises because that's the way we're built, and it's a good thing too, for other reasons. We don't need to get into that now. So when you're constructing a scare, you want to think about how we travel through senses, how evocative those sensorial stimulations will be, whether it's smell or touch, usually not taste, but that can happen. There's a play in New York that went on for a long time called Sleep No More, which is a version of Macbeth, which I'll talk about in a little bit because I directed that myself. But there was taste in it. People ate food, but they didn't know what they were eating. In a haunted house that I did was as a kid, we well, I'm sure many of you played this game at sleepovers where you blindfold someone and you feed them things and they have to guess what it is. And usually you give them jalapeno peppers or something nasty and they don't know what it is and are grossed out. It's that negating of the sense which creates another sense, a heightened awareness that also is played upon in the haunted house or the scary play or movie. By reducing our ability to see into a dark, gloomy place, we have heightened ear, auditory sense. And so you'll see in scary movies the music, the weird string music that goes up in pitch as the frame gets darker and darker and the threat becomes more real, more palpable. And all those kind of orchestrations and compositions are the job of the director, the writer, and the designers who combine to create this immersive experience that we know as the haunted house. All right, let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the play that I directed, Macbeth, back in 2012 at my former institution. So this is a picture of Macbeth. We did it in a contemporary setting. For those of you who don't know, I'll be very quick. Macbeth was written by Shakespeare in about 1604 for James I, who had assumed the throne after Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth. And that's important to know, believe it or not, and I'll tell you in a minute. So Macbeth is a Scottish lord, a thane, and he's just come out of a big battle where he saved Scotland. And on the road back home, he encounters three witches, and these three witches prophesy that someday he and his friend will be king. He will be king, but his friend Banquo, Banquo won't be king, but his sons will be king. And of course, it's very freaky and weird. Macbeth then is in his castle, and the king of Scotland comes along, and I'll show that slide in a second. What did I say? Right, so James I, the king. James was Scottish, and he actually believed in witches. And he also had a number of edicts in which he outlawed behavior that seemed associated with devil worship. And there was a lot of rumors at the time that there were witches going on. And this was a famous story. And actually, James I was supposedly descended from the character Banquo. So Macbeth and Banquo were real people, although this story wasn't exactly real. It's a tale. The prophecy by the witches ends up coming true. But of course, like most prophecies, it doesn't come out quite the way Macbeth thinks it's going to come out. Many of you may be familiar with the play. So we're going to go to the next slide. So just to go through the play a little bit, That in the center there is King Duncan in our version. Now we did a contemporary version. I set it in a vaguely Eurasian area, and we did it on a very what I would call a unit set that was showed multiple locations, and we that allowed us to create a different kinds of locations quickly and easily, mostly with light and sound. So you can see in the center, the King Duncan, and Macbeth is talking to him and welcome to his house, and Banquo is next to him, and the various costumes, and these were inspired by the conflicts primarily in Iraq and Turkmenistan and other places like that. So the next slide is later when Macbeth and Banquo are talking about the prophecy and what should happen. Macbeth has just hosted a big party for Duncan. Duncan's sleeping in Macbeth's house, and then things start getting weird. This woman in the back there, I will get to her in a little bit. All right, so this is actually towards the opening of the play, just before the prophecy comes. Now, I've seen a lot of versions of Macbeth, and I never really liked them very much. The witches, I thought they were never scary, and it was really important to me that that we scare the audience, because I was working on not on the ambition of Macbeth, which a lot of people focus on, but his fear. I actually believe that, or I decided as director, that fear is what really motivates Macbeth, and that drives him to make really, really bad decisions. But I never saw a production where I liked the witches. They were strange and weird, and nobody knew how to do them. And I actually was in a production of Macbeth where we were all witches, and that sort of inspired mine, because I decided to have no witches at all. I cut them from the play. Instead, I was inspired by the movie Fallen, and I could drop the link in the chat for those of you who are curious. Let's see if I can do it. I'm not sure. Roz, can I just? I can't see that. They can't see the chat. Can I drop something in the Q&A myself? Can I? Maybe I can't. I'm going to drop it in. Maybe you guys can put it into the Q&A. So that's that. All right. So where was I? Right. So this picture of these are 3 people who have just been killed in the beginning of the play, and they are inhabited by the spirit of the witch. In the movie Fallen, which is a scary movie with Denzel Washington, the killer migrates from person to person just by touch. It's really spooky, and I love that idea. So what I decided was have each of the all the witches inhabit the dead people who were killed in the course of Macbeth, and there's a lot of people killed in Macbeth. So that's the picture of this woman who rises from the dead, and then we use its spooky electronic sound effects to create this crazy voice, and she prophesizes to Macbeth. And that's Banquo's listening to her, and they don't know what to do. So this is later in the play where Macbeth has just killed Duncan in his sleep. Lady Macbeth, way in the background, drugged the guards, got them drunk, and they fell asleep, and Macbeth went in and stabbed them. And Lady Macbeth discovers Macbeth here freaking out with knives in his hands, thinking about what he has done. And so you can see the creepy effects, the kind of interesting lighting effects that are going on, the shadows and the levels. And this creates a sense of isolation and strangeness that helps the audience take the journey with Macbeth. So the next slide, if you're seeing it, this is Banquo. Macbeth ends up having Banquo killed by 2 murderers, and he comes back to haunt Macbeth after Macbeth has been named king, and so we put him in this bloody outfit. It was similar to the camo he had on earlier, and if you can see, it's hard to see, you can see his head bashed in because the killer's bashed in his head in the play, and so we want to make a nice bloody effect. That's that disgust coming in. And the next slide, this is a famous scene, if you see it, of Lady Macbeth when she washes her hands. She had gone in to retrieve the daggers, to put the daggers back on Duncan, because it's the murder weapon, right? And she can't get the blood off her hands in her imagination, and so she's been sleepwalking for most of the play, and this is a famous scene where she's sleepwalking. So what we try to do with the Macbeth is have you enter an immersive world in which sound and light and even the tactile sense with misters and fog, which you could actually feel with your fingers, would bring the audience into the world of the play. And by a similar method, that's how haunted houses work too, except it's a total immersive experience. So how do you scare the audience? We think about, what are people afraid of? And they're very basic things. They're afraid of being killed. They're afraid of scary noises, anything that seems like a threat to survival. And it's really as basic as that. And, you know, and scary movies boil it down to that kind of essential. You know, is this person going to live or die? But the important difference in both the movie and in a haunted house and in a play is that at the bottom of it, you know it's pretend. And that's why you enjoy it. So I'm going to cut and paste a couple other things in the chat that will give you some of the science and the neuroscience behind the thing I just talked about. And I encourage you to explore these topics. They're a lot of fun. And yeah, that's it for my presentation. And take it away, Jim Langley.
Will do. Thank you, Paul. It's been a quick 25 years since we worked together. Yeah.
Indeed.
Okay. The thing that I want to stress to you today is atmosphere and some of the tricks of the trade that can help you create this world of a haunted house or a play, film, whatever it is that you are trying to accomplish in this vein. And so one of the key things that Paul just mentioned is fog and mist, because it creates an atmosphere of mystery. And let me say two different things to think about. Fog, in the theatrical sense, usually means the low-lying fog to the ground. Think of the classic Frankenstein and Dracula movies. There's always a graveyard, and in that graveyard is that low fog that the tombstones kind of raise out of. So that is what I consider fog. Mist, on the other hand, is aerosol, okay? And that is when particulates are suspended in the air. They're so fine, and they hang there for a good long time. So a couple ways that you can deal with the fog and the mist. First of all, let me talk about mist. There are machines that you can buy that create wonderful mist. That's about the only way you can do it, is by a mist machine, sometimes called fog machine. But in this case, I'll call it mist because that's what it creates. And some of these fog machines are upwards of $1,000 for the good ones. So it's not cheap. But as in all the things I'm going to talk about, make friends with people that already have this equipment. Typically, some of the nicer high schools with big theaters attached that have their own technical department, they might have one in stock. Certainly, almost every university and college theater department has them. So, make a phone call. Call the technical director of that theater and say, is there any way that I can rent or borrow? Oftentimes, colleges especially have a philosophy called town gown. And town gown comes from the gown, or is the academic robe of a college. You know, the old robes that professors used to wear, okay? And the town, of course, are the people outside the university. And relations go on. You know, you really depend on that relationship, that town gown relationship. And so many departments will push that kind of thing. So sometimes you can borrow costumes, you can borrow simple machinery like this that are pretty easy to take care of and easy to operate. Another thing is to rent them. And in renting, I'm talking about from a theatrical supply company. And you can Google, you know, theatrical supply companies, There's one in particular that I can recommend that I use for over 30 years, and that is Norcosco. Okay? Norcosco is short for Northwest Costume Company. And they started out as costumes, and then they went into the entire field of theater production. And so they sell everything from tape that you can use in the theater, all the way to lighting instruments, to dimmers, foggers, or these mist machines that I'm talking about. And sometimes they rent. So contact a place like Roscoe. Now, one of the brands, the products that Norcosco sells is Roscoe. Roscoe, I was a good customer of theirs for 35 years, and all I got was this crummy cap. All right, Roscoe is, they sell everything. Paint, color media for lighting instruments, fog machines, etc. They make quality stuff. And when I say quality, I certainly mean it's good and it's safe. And it's a reasonable price at Norcosco for these Roscoe products. Okay? So, Roscoe is a good brand. Now, you have this fog machine that creates this wonderful mist that'll fill the entire picture of your space, whether it's in your haunted house or in a theater. Now you need the fluid that goes in it, and that's called fog juice. Do not go cheap on fog juice, because the actors are inhaling this mist and the audience members are inhaling it. So you don't want to have something that's bad, okay, some cheap product. So the Roscoe fog juice is a good product. So you might consider that. Go with a big name brand and something like that. Now, safety first, and always in technical theater, because everything in technical theater has an element of danger to it. And you have to control that danger so that no one gets hurt. Audience or actors or technicians. Okay? One of the things to remember as far as this fog juice is warning the patrons. Outside of the haunted house or outside of your theater in the lobby, have a little easel there that you can have a sign that is posted clearly that says, fogger used in this production, asthma warning. Okay? And that is that some of this mist may trigger asthma in people. So be careful of that. Let them know so that they won't enter the space and have medical complications. Okay? Now, this mister is wonderful because this mist not only creates a strange atmosphere, one that you typically aren't in, but then lights coming through it are visible. The shafts of light coming through, you have this wonderful glow, kind of like the powerful instruments at a rock concert, which also use a considerable amount of misters. Okay? So that, going by the way of the machine that you can buy for $1,000 or rent, or better yet, borrow for free, is one way of creating that atmosphere. Another one is this low-lying fog. And with that, a lot of you probably played with it. It's dry ice. Okay, now, there's some tricks to this, how to create the dry ice. One of the major things to think about is how much of it do you need. If you want to cover your entire haunted house floor with this low-lying fog, which is really cool, okay? Of course, everything costs when it comes to creating this kind of atmosphere. And so you can get a dry ice machine, okay, that you put the dry ice into. Typically, those run around $500. Once again, see if one's for rent or if you can borrow it. Always go for the cheaper options because, it all adds up. And dry ice that goes into the machines can be difficult to find. Now, say in Peoria, Illinois, where Bradley University is, when I would work on those, I would typically go to the fire extinguisher company, and they handle dry ice. So check with that. The old, you can Google it, you can look at the old-fashioned yellow pages, and there should be an entry for dry ice and find out who your local vendor is. And it doesn't come cheap. It varies from place to place. So it's something to always get a quote about and see how much it's going to cost you. Now, how to store the dry ice? Tricky, because it evaporates. And one of the things is, if you're going to have a weekend-long thing, say 3 nights of your haunted house or your production, you want to buy it all at once. Okay? Especially, most of these things take place on the weekend. And so these companies may be closed. So you have to stock up on Friday afternoon for the Friday night, performance, or Saturday and perhaps a Sunday. So get a large styrofoam cooler. They're pretty cheap, right? Okay? Put the dry ice in that. And then, perhaps at this fire extinguisher company, you can borrow one of their insulation blankets. And they're like a plastic quilt. And you put the styrofoam container on that and then wrap it completely covered and sealed, because you want to keep that thing as cold as possible so that you won't lose all your product to evaporation. Now, if you're buying for 3 days, plan on half of your dry ice simply evaporating even in the cooler. It's gone, okay? So you have to buy double what you're going to use. And what this means is there's a lot of trial and error and experimentation. Do not wait until the weekend of the week of your performance to do this. Start weeks ahead of time. Okay? And then you can buy it, get that dry ice, and always wear insulated gloves. Holding dry ice, it's so cold it'll burn your skin. So be careful of that. Always insulated gloves. Don't touch it with your bare hands. Okay? Now, those fancy $500 machines are great, but almost every theater department in America has an old dry ice machine, because it's an effect that you may use at least once a year for a production. And this entails, these machines are typically 55-gallon barrels, the big oil barrels, okay? And in the bottom of it, you have to put a water heater element, okay? And make sure, if you are making one, that you buy one that operates on 120 volts out of your standard outlet, so that you don't have to end up using a lot of money to pay an electrician to get you a 240 volt supply to where your machine might be. So 120 volt water heating element in the bottom of this drum. Fill a drum half full of water and heat the water. You turn it on 5 or 6 hours before the show, so that gives the time for the water to get good and hot. Suspended in the top of the barrel is a pole with a basket. You put the dry ice in that, carefully close the lid with the pole coming out of it, and then you submerge the dry ice into the water, and it will create a rumble for you, because that hot water, there's a big reaction with that dry ice, and it starts pumping out that fog fast. Up near the top of your barrel, you have a dryer hose coming out, and you can use that to direct the fog to wherever you want it across the stage. Remember that the dry ice fog is heavier than air. That's why it sinks to the floor, and it will go to the lowest place. So if you're in a theater situation, it goes to the edge of the stage and over the edge and into the orchestra pit or the audience. And it's kind of fun because it's nice and cool, but it won't hurt the audience. Then, and the mist of breathing that in is relatively harmless. It's just carbon dioxide, which is the same stuff you exhale. So, you can breathe a little bit of it, no problem at all. Okay. Now, if you're making this, it's a good idea, one, get yourself an electrician to wire up that water heater element. Okay. The second thing you should do is to make friends with a welder, because they're going to have to seal where that element goes in and the wires come out. And so a welder can be a great help. Sometimes your high schools have a VOTEC department that has a welding shop in it, so you have to check on that. Once again, maybe they'll donate their time for the cause. So that dry ice is submerged and it pumps out, and you'd be amazed at how strong the flow of that dry ice, low-hanging fog covers that entire stage. It works really fast, and you can keep it coming if you need to. Okay, but it only lasts so long, so use it sparingly. Okay. That's pretty much it. Don't wait to test it. All right, always rehearse when it comes to this stuff. Now, if you need a small effect, you can get a bucket or a bowl of hot water and put a chunk of dry ice in it, and that will overflow the sides of a cauldron, or you say you have an effect where you're cooking something over a fire. You put a little dry ice in it, kind of looks like it's smoking and boiling a little bit. So those are easy, fast ways to create great mood with either a mister or a fog machine. Now, one of the important kinds of things that you need to do is to focus the attention of the audience. And one of the best ways to get the audience to look where you want them to look is with lighting. Lighting can be very expensive. Gee, make that phone call again. See if there's any equipment you can borrow. Now, if you borrow theatrical lighting instruments, remember, lamps are very expensive. Okay, so you have to deal with that kind of problem. But there are other ways to do the lighting, especially in haunted houses, that can be very, very cheap. And one of the easiest is to look in your garage and see if you have a good old-fashioned clamp light. You can buy them at any Lowe's, Home Depot, wherever, hardware store, for $5-6. Put it in the size of lamp, depending upon how bright you want it. Plug it in, and then you can clamp it to whatever the scenery is and direct the light to wherever you want it to be. Okay. It works. It's a cheap trick, all right? Not practical in a theater situation where you need to have long throws of powerful beams of light to illuminate the actors. But in this haunted house situation, it's a pretty cool thing to do. And you can rig up a whole bunch of those with small little dimmers that you can buy at a hardware store and create the effects of, one, you have to illuminate the space, because typically the space is going to be black, all right? It's going to be dark until you bring the light in that you want to use to create this mood, this atmosphere, all right? And the light provides the focus. The audience member will look at the brightest thing around them. So whatever it is you want them to look at, make sure that that object or that person is the brightest. Okay? And it's all relative to absolute darkness. You can have a dim light for the whole stage and a brighter light to punch up and draw the eyes of the audience exactly where you want them to see. Okay? one of the things that really helps in this kind of situation is color. Color creates great mood. And once again, even if you're using a simple clamp light from your garage, you can change the color of those by using what is called color media. And color media, the old word for it is gels, which is the material they used to be made of, but gelatin. But now they're made of a very, very tough mylar kind of material that resists the high heat of lighting instruments. And so by yourself, you go to that theatrical supply house and you look up Roscoe and buy yourself some gels. Now, what colors are available? Here's a swatch book. Hundreds of every imaginable color that you may need in your production, okay? The cost. You don't get to buy little pieces. The gels, or the color media that you buy, come in sheets really big, okay? And they are about 18 by 22 inches, right around in there. It's called lighting, color media, and this brand that I use, Roscoe, is Roscoe Lux, okay? So, there you go. Great, look what happens to the different feel of this. Ooh, that's kind of cool, all right? Any color you want, you can do it. You want a mysterious night setting, blues, to create that cool, cool night setting. Okay? So, have at it with the lighting materials. Now, this is about $6 a sheet. So, depending upon your budget, you can cover probably 6 clamp lights with one sheet. But you will want different colors to create your different moods and effects. So, very essential kind of equipment in creating some kind of mood is focus with the lights and color for the mood. All right? A little bit about safety once again. Everything's about safety. All right? Audiences get very nervous in blackouts. Now, if the audience is seated like in a theater, they are much more comfortable if the blackout is no more than 5 or 6 seconds. You go into 10 or 15 seconds, and they start to get a little bit uncomfortable because they're sitting in a group of strangers, all right? And you don't never know what the person next to you is going to do, all right? So, be careful about the length of your blackouts. If it's a haunted house situation where people may be walking through corridors, it gets a little bit trickier, of course, and that is that they are standing. People that have to stand in blackout may start to lose their balance because they depend on that visual to maintain. Maybe they have inner ear problems that affects the balance a little bit. So be careful about the length of any kind of blackout. If something goes wrong, and it certainly can happen, someone trips, all right, or someone has a heart attack, they go into hysterics, and you're in an emergency situation, make sure you have a dedicated person next to a light switch that turns on the regular room lights of whatever the space is that you're using, right? They have to be close. And make sure you rehearse this kind of thing. You know, brief them about this, because the first thing they should do is hit that light. Gone is the atmosphere, all right? Gone are the tricks. Now it's safety to get them out of there, all right? So be very, very careful about that. You don't want to create a panic situation. Some places, it's fun to use a strobe light, that bright pulsing light, okay? If you use that, back to the lobby card. Have that warning posted outside the theater that a strobe light is going to be used, because strobe lights can trigger epilepsy, okay, an epilepsy fit. So a person going in, if they have epilepsy, they'll know about this. And if they see that word strobe light, they'll turn around, or they should, okay? But you are protecting your arse about this, because if you do it and they're not warned about it, same thing with the mist, you are liable legally. So be careful about that. You don't want to be sued over something, you know, as fun as what this is supposed to be. So just be very, very careful about you know, what it is that you're doing. Next thing I'd like to talk to you about is the vampire stake through the heart. How to do this in a setting where the audience can be fairly close. They're really easy to make. You'll need just a few things. A wooden dowel that you can get at the hardware store, typically called closet rods, right? But make sure it's wooden because you have to cut it and form it. And a cardboard tube, something like a long toilet paper roll, you know, the little cardboard insert that the toilet paper is wound on, or your paper towels. A lot of those have it wrapped around. Okay, so what you want to do, a simple little diagram here, is this would be your toilet paper roll. Okay, with the dowel, buy a dowel and take the roll to the store with you, and find a dowel that just inserts tightly into the roll, okay? By a length of that, a couple feet long is more than enough that you will need. Take one piece that's about 2 or 3 inches long and sharpen the end of it, but not too sharp, okay? It can come towards a point, and then you can kind of curve it a little bit so that it blunts that edge. You don't want to really harm an actor with a sharp point like that, okay? Insert that about 1 inch into the tube and glue it, staple it, however, get it good and secure. That thing stays as is. The other dowel, you cut another section, maybe 8 inches long, okay? And it inserts into the other end of the tube, all right? And this slides, so you don't glue this, so that when you use it, like so, and this is against the actor's skin like that, and you take an old rubber mallet and pound on this edge, it forces the tube, or the dowel, down into the tube, and it makes it look like it's disappearing into the body. A cheap trick, really easy, all right? And one thing to remember is rehearse, rehearse, rehearse to get it right. After you have it made, you can paint the whole thing brown and texture it with wood grain, whatever, to make sure that it's, you know, looking good. And practice using it a lot. All righty? The last thing I'd like to cover is blood. Okay, you can make your own blood. You can also buy it. Buy it. Roscoe. All right? And, but it gets expensive. Make your own. All you need is a couple things from the grocery store. It's relatively cheap. So here I will demonstrate how to make some stage blood. Okay. All right, you want to tilt it down to the hole a little bit more. You can set I'm having my cameraman hold it for me. All right, you can stand to the side if you want so you can see what you're doing. Okay, the first thing you'll need is good old-fashioned clear Karo syrup, K-A-R-O. It's about the only syrup they use on pancakes, whatever, that is clear. All right? You pour a goodly amount into the bowl. A little bit more for fun. Now this is very, very thick, okay? You can see with this whisk that it's nice and thick. Alrighty, now with that, you want to add red food coloring. It'll take quite a bit, and you really can't put in too much red, but why waste it? Alright, so as we add plenty of food coloring, 20, 30 drops to begin with. You can always experiment with it. Mix it up. Looking tasty. All right, now, that's pretty darn red, okay? You want to add just a few drops of blue. And start with 1 or 2 drops, because a little bit of blue goes a long, long way. We'll see if I put in too much with 2 drops. Almost. But it's still pretty good. This is really dark, nasty blood. Look at that. Okay. I want to see it on a white object. All right. And tasty too. It is edible. All right, now, one of the things that you can do if you're going to have the blood go through some tubing for some kind of effect, like shooting out somewhere, you can put just a little bit of water in. Very little to thin it out. Okay? And you can make 5 gallons of this if you want. It adds up, of course, in cost, so you have to determine how much you want. And once again, still looks good, just a little bit thinner. So experiment with that, and thank you, and try to come up with just exactly how much you may need as far as the stage blood goes.
Dean.
Thank you, my wife Susan. Okay, so stage blood, easy to make, as you saw, and relatively cheap. Now, one of the things that you're going to want to start to think about with the stage blood is costumes. This has food coloring in it, as if any of you know, food coloring stains costumes. There's a simple solution. Take your mixture, take some clear liquid dishwashing soap. You have it under the sink, right? Use it every night, but make sure it's clear, and put in 1/4 of a cup or so. The more you make, the more you put in. Mix it up. It won't, start to affect the color or the consistency, and it will wash out of the costumes much, much easier. But the most important thing on this is make sure you test it. All right? Go to the costume designer and get a piece of the fabric, let's say the shirt that the character is wearing, and test it to make sure that your formula and the amount of detergent you're using is the proper amount. But once you do that, remember, it's not edible anymore. So, it could be a nasty experience if you got in the situation of having to drink it with the detergent in it. I'm cleaning up my mess so I don't put my hand in the blood here. Okay. Now, other ways to use it. What do you do with this blood once you have it? Right? One of the things that you can think about is a blood bag. I did a production, I directed and designed a production of Dracula years ago at Bradley University back in the 80s. And one of the things that we did there was, of course, Dracula dies with the stake, just as I showed you, is how we made it. And we took a small baggie and sealed it up at the top, more than just the kind of Ziploc, but glue it shut, so it's good and strong. And then we scored it a little bit with a little cut. Put a piece of tape over that cut so it holds together, and then took a hypo needle. You can buy them at Farm and Fleet, you know, the farm supply place. They use a lot of syringes and things with cattle, etc. And you take that and then you inject the blood into the bag. All right? The weak point of the bag is the tape. Now, if you want to leave the tape end up a little bit and put a little ring on it, you got a zip cord. And open up that bag, and there's the blood rolling out onto the shirt or whatever of Dracula. Right. So, one of the things to remember, rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. We had one special rehearsal on the weekend before the show opened, you know, the following Thursday, on just special effects for Dracula. You know, including the fog, the smoke, flash pots, whatever it is that you want to have for your special effects. And rehearsed that. So we had Dracula come out, the costume, the ring costume, and the blood had been tested to make sure it's not going to stain. So the lights go down to down center stage near the audience, and Dracula has been forced to the ground by the crucifix being held on his forehead, which paralyzes him. And he falls to the floor. Then Professor Van Helsing grabs the stake, gets down next to him, puts the stake near the blood bag, whacks it. And the blood bag, well, what we had is then Dracula, in his agony of the stake going in his heart, he reaches up and grabs that little ring on the tape, and the blood bag opens. Well, what he did that he didn't do later, because he learned a lesson here, is the actor slapped the blood bag. Well, that thing burst, and blood went everywhere. It went all over all the actors standing around them looking. They were dripping with this stuff. It was hilarious, but luckily it was the technical rehearsal for it. That's when you make the mistakes. And so we knew how to deal with training the actor to use this a little bit more. So by the time, you know, opening night rolls around, hit the stake, the ring is pulled, and the blood bubbles up around the stake, and it's a great effect. Okay? So the one thing to remember is always use that. Now, there are other things that you can do to use it. Another scene in the same production of Dracula, which was actually called The Passion of Dracula, and it had where Dracula came in to the room, the doors opened by themselves, and he flowed in with his big, beautiful red satin-lined cape, and he stood, and there he put Wilhelmina, or Mina, in a trance, and she collapses on the sofa, and he stands over her, and he takes his fingernail, and he opens up his chest, and he draws his fingernail across his chest, and blood drips down from that, and then he raises her head, and she drinks his blood. Cool. All right. And the audience reaction was spectacular every night, because it goes back to the disgusting. And so that was a great effect. So how do you do that? We went through several things. One was to have the actor hold a sponge soaked in the blood, so that as he does it, he can kind of squeeze it. But then it was fake. It came out around his fingers and just didn't look good. So what we came up with, we got a a piece of clear tubing, like the drip irrigation tubing that you may have outside in your lawn, the tiny, tiny, 1/8 inch tubing, and a little bulb at the end, kind of like a large eyedropper bulb, and glued that all up, and you put the blood in the bulb, and then as he held the bulb, and the tube came down his finger, okay? And it was attached to his finger with a little piece of tape. And as he did that, he simply squeezed the bulb, and the blood ran out of the end of his finger, and it made it look like it was opening up the chest. Really a cool effect. So all these things can be done, but they take a lot of creativity, research. Start early and rehearse so it's ready to go by the time your haunted house or your performance opens, in a few days usually. One of the important things, back to safety, make sure you have a fire marshal come in and inspect everything before you open up for patrons. That's once again, if someone is hurt, you have a piece of paper from the fire marshal that simply says safety has been checked out. So it's a way to cover yourself in a potential lawsuit if something gets hurt. Okay? So remember, create the effect, draw the focus with lighting, add spooky sound and screams, and have yourself a darn good performance. And that's my spiel. So over to you.
Bravo, Jim.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of activity in the chat.
Okay.
Somebody's tired, but people have asked questions about where to do makeup, how to be a director, things like that. I'll try to answer a couple of those things. And I thank you for the fake blood recipe. I'm sure you can see those now.
Can everybody hear me?
So it's
okay, as far as makeup goes, yeah, did you want to answer a question about makeup?
No, go ahead.
Well, or no, actually, this is in a question and answer, so we're going to give everybody a break for a couple of minutes to submit, right?
I believe that's true.
Okay.
Yes, can everybody hear me?
Indeed.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So yes, we're going to give you just a couple of minutes to refresh your drink and put in some comments or questions, and in just a couple of minutes we'll have a discussion. And I think, Paul, some of these are some really terrific questions, and you might want to mention it.
I have been answering them in the chat.
Yes, and I think everybody can see them probably, but
I
they
hope
were
so.
focused on Jim here.
Yes, I can see the questions.
Am I moving this time, or am I still?
Now you're moving.
Okay. Okay. All right.
So what's the deal? We're going to take a break here and then come back for questions, or?
Yeah, just a couple minutes, and I'm wondering how many haunted houses are actually happening right now.
I don't know. Probably not many.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so.
Okay, it's 7:14. So how about if we start in 7:16, and people can? It gives you a couple minutes to run into the kitchen or whatever, and
Okay.
come back with something in. Does that work?
Works
Yeah.
for me. Thank you.
What's that? That was perfect. Thanks. That's sticky stuff. Man. Is there any, let's see, as far as the questions go, I just have like one page. Is there any way you can scroll? Doesn't seem.
I guess you can on the right-hand side there.
And I don't know if.
Oh, yeah, with your iPad, you may not be able to.
iPad, no, it just shows about a total of about 10 questions that I can see. But, so if you guys want to read me a question, pertains to me, that's great.
Right. Maybe, let me see. I said about 16 after. Is everybody with us?
Uh-huh.
I don't see Paul.
Oh.
Oh, yes, we can put your camera on.
Yeah, I turned my camera off. Here I am.
There you go.
I actually need to keep my glasses on so I can read these questions.
You answered here. I thought some of the questions are really cool. A good discussion.
Let's see. What's this? Since walking in haunted houses are not being done, what would you recommend as a scare tactic for drive-through haunted houses? Oh, that's an interesting question. Because you don't want to damage someone's vehicle. I think probably, and I saw someone posted that someone's doing a car wash, using a car wash as a haunted house, which I think is brilliant. So rather than have you could change what wipes the car. So you could change it into entrails or, something that looks really nasty. You could do a lot of loud noises. You could have jets of water suddenly spraying against the side of the car. It would take a little bit and a lot of thinking to make sure people could proceed through safely. The problem with a car is that if someone got scared and their foot is on the gas and suddenly they floor it, the people in front of them could really get clobbered. So you want to be able to control, and that's I think Jim was talking about that a lot. You got to be able to control the environment. And whether it's a blood pack on your body or it's an experience in which you're immersed, you want to control you limit the possibility of behavior so people can be safe. Otherwise, it could be a disaster. I highly recommend a very amusing documentary you can find on YouTube about Action Park in New Jersey. And it's about people who did not take things very seriously in safety. And it wasn't about haunted house, but it was a disaster and actually not very funny, except in some spots. But safety is utterly critical, because if I feel threatened, as I was saying earlier, I'll stop watching, I'll stop enjoying myself, and I'll really have a real reaction. It's a very fine line. But like I said, the pretend allows us to quickly recover our equilibrium. We're disturbed by a surprise event. If we understand that it's a pretend, we can quickly realize it's not a threat and it's an opportunity, and we can then engage again. But if it feels unsafe, you have to stop. So, for example, I'd done a lot of fights on stage, a lot. And Jim will remember this from when we did Richard III. We used broadswords, really heavy broadswords, and I'm a pretty skilled sword player. But I was clobbered by this kid one day. I almost lost consciousness. And it just happens sometimes. You plan every move out, but one little slip and bang, you're out. I've been knocked out on stage during a stage fight. The guy had taken off his glasses, and he didn't check his distance, and he smashed me right in the face, and I went right out. So yeah. Yeah. Now, for the audience, I'll tell a quick story about the Theatrical Illusion, and then I'll stop. So I was in a show off Broadway. It was a musical that no one's ever heard of, called Olympus on My Mind. It was a cute little show, and in the show I played a character who was a slave to this king. It took place in ancient Greece. It doesn't matter. It was very, very silly. Anyway, I was working with this guy who had just he replaced someone else and was new to the part. And his first entrance, he's to come in, he's to shove my character, who he was very mad at, and he really shoved me. He was excited, right? It was his big first entrance on the off-Broadway show, and wham! And I hit the floor really hard. Now the floor happened to be hollow, and so the thud that it made was gigantic, and the whole audience went. They were really worried about me. And I was lying on the ground. I'm supposed to be pretending I'm unconscious because the character's like faking hurt, because that's what clowns do. They fake their hurt. But I heard the audience freak out. I knew I had to reassure them. And I swear, instinctually, I just went, "I'm fine, I'm fine." And I got the laugh, but I also got the audience to release from the stress of the fear of someone being unsafe. If it crosses the line into thinking that guy's really hurt, then the play stops and the illusion stops and the fun stops.
Yeah.
So my advice is, don't do a haunted house with cars unless you really, really have it under control.
I totally agree with you about that, the darkness, Jim, that you were talking about. And it's interesting to have that down to the number of seconds, because I think we've all been in situations where they did that and maybe didn't know about the number of seconds or whatever, and all of a sudden it's not funny anymore, and everybody's just like kind of alarmed and kind of thinking like, how am I getting out of here? What's my best exit? And that kind of thing. And it doesn't take long for people to start worrying about it.
Let's see. Can I be heard right now?
Yes.
Okay. I noticed a question here from a person named Josie, and it's about theatrical makeup kits. A lot of your towns, the call may have something like a costume shop or a theater supply shop, and they often stock makeup kits. Back in the day when I taught the makeup class, they were only about $15, but I imagine now they're 30 or 40. But one basic makeup kit can have pretty much everything you need to get started. But you do need a good book. And the Corson makeup book is like the Bible in the industry. Corson, C-O-R-S-O-N. And they have been cranking out these makeup books since the early 60s, I think. And they're still around. Shop around, buy a good used book of the Corson stage makeup book, and that'll get you started. Some basic makeup, and then you can always augment individually by going to places like that Norcosco that I talked about. They have kits in there. They have all kinds of makeup supplies. So go online to Norcosco, check out their makeup stuff. Okay?
Are there any other ones, Paul, that you want to talk about that you mentioned, that you answered here?
Okay. Someone asked, I don't think I answered this question, what was the scariest thing I ever, no, maybe I did answer this. What was the scariest thing I ever saw in a haunted house? Well, I remember seeing someone, I wasn't sure if it's a haunted house or where I saw this, but someone who was hung. And they did a good trick, but it was so creepy. The person was strung up and swinging, and then they opened their eyes, and I was like, whoa! It was just so frightening. And there's something very disturbing, very strange and disturbing to me to see someone hung. I think it's a very iconic image. I think it's one of those images you've seen mostly through film and television, but it has a lot of power. And the fact of someone's neck snapped, it's this disorientation of the body. The body is not supposed to be like this. And so when we see it like that, we feel like it's a definite threat. And, we're one of the few creatures that build rituals around death. And because we're aware of our own ending, unlike what we think are most creatures. We don't know. Elephants seem to have some relationship to death and mourning. We're not sure. But in any case, we certainly do. And we have a lot of these rituals that are built around trying to deal with the strangeness of the loss of agency. And what I mean by that is the ability to have control over your body. So when you see a body in this orientation, you recognize it as a body without agency, because no one is going to, except, a zombie is going to have their head like that. And so we're disturbed by that. And so we're going to withdraw, because if it could happen to them, it could happen to us. And that's what makes it so creepy. Let's see. What else?
I noticed another question here again from Josie about becoming a makeup artist. My advice on that is to go to your local community college or college, see if they offer a stage makeup class, and take it. That's where you learn the basics. One of my success stories was one of my students at Bradley University who took my class, got turned on by it. She also took a lighting class, which is wonderful for her future career. And she moved to Hollywood and started doing internships in some of the professional makeup companies there, and she ended up winning an Oscar for makeup design. She's the one that created all those great prosthetics for the Lord of the Rings.
Oh, wow.
So that's a proud Bradley grad, Tammy Lane. So it can all happen, but you have to take the initiative, take the course, practice, buy yourself the makeup kit, and then go to where it's happening, and you can take some professional training courses there and work your way into the industry. It doesn't happen overnight, but if you have the passion and that will to wait tables until you get that break and get that makeup job, you'll have a wonderful career.
And you can start now practicing on your friends and volunteering. People in the theater, there's plenty of actors, bless their hearts, but there are fewer people who want to do design, and actors are always looking for people to help them out. So, and practice on your friends, practice on yourself, and it can be a lot of fun. Someone, Jim, asked about the fog, about will fog show up well on video?
Yes. Yeah, sure. It's used in film a lot. Okay, so it does work. Once again, how much, I don't know. I'm not a video person. But I know that these same machines are used to create fog no matter what the application, but just test it out and see what works the best for you. And work, as far as video, work with your director of photographer or cinematographer, another word for it. And you can work these things out, because really it comes down that director of photography is in charge of the lighting. And so the lighting is what makes the fog look great. So you have to work hand in hand, that collaboration between the two, in order to achieve those things.
Here's a question from Sophia. When you mentioned withdrawing when you think it could happen to you, I find that I feel that way about TV. I feel extremely uncomfortable when I see a slit throat or something like that. Absolutely, that's its intention. The whole idea is for you to be repelled by it. And that's a natural instinct, to get as far away from the threat as you possibly can. And each of us as individuals will have, I'm not sure if it's predispositions or learned dispositions, probably a combination of both, of things that particularly bother us. Everybody has a thing that, some people don't like frogs, some people like reptiles, some people have a thing about bugs, some people don't like the sight of blood, right? And it's not always clear where those things come from. Often they're learned, but they might be as well, you might be predisposed in some way from I'm not prepared to say there's a genetic predisposition, but there's probably some genetic predispositions to certain kinds of disgust and fear, because we built in it. We have phobias, and phobias exist they don't just emerge out of the conscious mind, they emerge out of the physiology of the human being. You can't separate those two things. So there's probably some elements of a genetic predisposition for certain disaffinities, I guess is the word, or things that really freak you out, is it maybe a clear way to say it. So totally understandable. I don't know if any of you saw this show, The Boys, which is this show on Prime, Amazon Prime. It's a superhero dystopia. There was a lot of cutting off of heads in that show, and I have to say, it was funny, but also horrible. It's so disturbing to see heads chopped off, and the level of sophistication now in special effects is really amazing.
I'm not seeing all the
Yes,
questions.
and then Sophia says, I almost imagine that could happen to me. Of course, it's very unlikely, but that's the whole idea. the filmmaker or the theater artist wants you to step into the shoes of the character. And because this is another thing that artists exploit, performing artists exploit, is our empathy. We actually have neurons in our brains. There are kinds of motor neurons in which when an actor does an intentional gesture, like to reach or grab, similar neurons in your motor neurons in your mind fire. The science isn't perfect, but they're called mirror neurons, and there's some dispute about it, and I'm not going to get into it, except to say that when we say I was moved by a performance, you really were moved. You were literally moved from a psychophysical point of view. So when those kind of things bother you and you feel like it could happen to you, that's exactly right. And the artist is playing on that idea that when I feel something, the audience also feels it in a more shadowy way, but they still do. And there's scientific proof that that's happening. Yes, the flying monkeys from Wizard of Oz. Yeah, they're strange and weird and creepy. They're classic, and they're not, I mean, they're not sophisticated at all, but it's the lighting, it's the sound, and the fact that they swarm. There's something that's very primordial. Swarming bugs is something we definitely don't like. I mean, there's a reason why a plague of locusts is in the Bible and was a plague. I mean, that's a terrible thing, and we were really afraid of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anything else here? I want a tarantula. Josie says she wants a tarantula. They're actually very beautiful spiders, and they're actually not too. They look a lot scarier than they are. The ones you want to stay away from are around recluse. Don't go to that one.
Yes.
The tarantulas though can be a good pet. Oh, cool, Josie. She's held one before. They're kind of fuzzy. Okay, let's see. Anything else? Okay. Unless anybody else has some other questions, I think maybe we're good to go. What do you say, Judith?
Great.
Well, I wondered, Paul, if there were a couple that you responded to earlier on that maybe Jim had a different take on that he might want to take a look at. I think one of the things we talked about is how you get into this. Does everybody have to be an actor in order to do some of this? And you responded to that. Maybe Jim wants to respond.
Well, I'll let Paul talk about the acting, but every theater department in your university, they love to have people come and volunteer for crews. And you can learn a heck of a lot about how theater works, sound, lighting, makeup, by volunteering for those crews. So don't be shy. The first day you get on campus, go knock on the theater door, introduce yourself. Because I imagine NIU is the same as Bradley was, is that it's a university theater production. So you don't necessarily have to be a major to take part. It's for everybody. Just go do it. Work up the courage. It's not hard to go because theater people are really friendly and they love to have more people come in to the fold. Okay, it's a fun collaboration. Everybody works for it, and it's a team, just like sports or anything else.
That's a great. I love that. It is like a team, but the great thing about art in general, and I think this goes for science too. When it's played well, everybody wins.
Mm-hmm. But NIU is. Do you have to be a major to audition?
We have a BFA program, a pretty serious conservatory program.
Uh-huh.
The auditions are open to all majors, BA and BFA, and generally they're not open to students outside of those two classes.
I see.
That said, the student productions, student-directed, are sometimes open to people from the outside. But there are some other places on campus that do theatricals. People who like to do artistic things. They find their home one way or another. But yeah, our first obligation has to be to the conservatory students. We got some we got some pretty classy programs, Jim. So it's fun to say.
Yeah, you go to a smaller university like Bradley, then everybody is allowed to do everything.
Right.
But we always, we always think about our majors first because that's their focus. But I mean, I've seen non-majors audition and get the lead role, and it just taught the acting majors, maybe I better prepare better for that audition.
Yes. Janine East just asked a question about, as an actor on a stage, what's the best way to pretend to die on stage? Long and drawn out or quickly and to the point? Well, it really depends. So, for example, at the end of Hamlet, when it takes Hamlet quite a while to die, but he has a lot of important things to say. It really depends on the playwright and what the effect we're trying to achieve. So let me go back to Macbeth, because I had several different deaths in that. One was drawn out. We killed this person with a knife, and we wanted to see the suffering of the person in this particular case. And so we staged it in such a way that a knife wound, a knife killing takes a little bit while. But we also wanted to show some real brutality. There's a scene in which children are killed, and we wanted to just really be brutal about it. And because we use contemporary weapons, we just had these children shot right on stage. It was meant to shock people, and it did. They just went down. And so the trick for the actor was, what happens to me when I'm shot? And how do and so we had to talk through that and look at the physiology of it and help the actors collapse in a correct way so it didn't look like some weird, theatrical death. Whereas with when Macbeth is finally killed, he's skewered on a sword, and Macduff holds him up for a while, and we see Macbeth and the life slowly dribble out of him, because that's the big moment of the play, right? We want to see the guy killed, and because that gives us a sense of completion. Whereas with the children, it's just shocking. It's hard to shock a contemporary audience, but the killing of children definitely does that. And in Macbeth, children are killed. It's it's intense. And so we wanted to go all in, because the sad fact is we live in a world in which that sadly has happened. And that was kind of the point I was making, because Shakespeare is 400 years old, and yet the issues that he discussed, that he covered in his plays, are still pertinent. And of course, all those plays also involve science. I mean, there's no artistic action that doesn't inevitably involve scientific exploration as well. Whether you're a painter, you're dealing with optics and color. And if you're a sculptor, you're dealing with mass and energy and gravity. When you're an actor, you're dealing with psychology and physiology, as well as all the other stage effects, chemistry, electronics. Computing is now a fabric of every artistry. So those of you who think you're scientists and aren't creative, no, that's a lie. You are creative and you're artistic. And those of you who think you're only artists and not scientists, no, that's wrong. You're also scientists. They're two sides of the same coin. And if we take anything else away from this, art and science are actually joined at the hip. They can't exist without the other. Sometimes the artist sees into the future ahead in ways that the scientists yet haven't caught up with. So, for example, the mirror neurons. Actors have known for thousands of years that when they are really playing well, the audience is literally moved. But it's only in the last 25 years or so that we've actually discovered the science, the neuroscience behind why that is so. And it turns out we have motor neurons in a place called the Broca area of the brain, but only because of the invention of magnetic resonance imagery have we able to see that. And some experiments by some Italian scientists on macaque monkeys, believe it or not. I happen to know all this because I'm very interested in it. The reason I went down the science rabbit hole was because I wanted to find out what it is about human behavior, and the more you look into it, the deeper you have to go, right down to the subatomic level. So we're all artists and we're all scientists. We're naturally so. We investigate our world in any way we can, and I encourage you all to continue doing that and enjoy the heck out of it.
Hear, hear.
I don't know if you saw the question about the best haunted house. Do you see that on there?
Oh, in Washington, in Virginia suburbs in Washington, D.C. Now a historically preserved house. Oh, is it a real haunted house? Or was it supposedly a haunted house? His head was in the center of a platter surrounded by... Oh, yes. Yeah, that's funny. That's a good bit. That's a good classic bit.
Mhm.
If you want to see a good spoof of scary movies or a haunted house, I suggest Young Frankenstein, though it's a little rude.
Oh, yeah.
But it's pretty funny. And they play a lot of games like that.
Mhm.
Do I know the person who directed Hamilton? I don't know him personally, but I know the guy who played the original King George in it, Brian Darcy James. His wife and I did a show. We did a kids show back a long time ago when I was first starting out. And I've been friends with her ever since, and she married Brian. Brian's a very, very nice guy. He didn't do it on Broadway because he ended up playing a show called Something Rotten, and he was a lead. It doesn't matter. It was another musical. Brian's a wonderful, wonderful actor. I know who the director is. He's a friend of Lin-Manuel Miranda's, but I've never met him. Great show.
Did you see a comment on there about somebody that needed to be carried off the stage?
Carried off the stage. Where's that? Towards the
Too
bottom,
large
or where is that?
I don't know. My husband sent it in, so he's right here, so he can ask the question.
Okay.
I'm the other half.
Hi.
I had a heavyweight wrestler. Went to a different high school than me. I went to the play. I don't remember what it was, but in the play he was killed with a sword in a sword fight. And they had to carry him off the stage, and they had never practiced carrying him off the stage. Well, the three people couldn't carry him off the stage. They had to bring stagehands in to help carry him off the stage.
I love it. I love it.
And he hold the sword, so the sword is dragging on the ground in back of him. And by that time, he was in hysterics. He was just in hysterics. You could see him shaking and laughing, and they carried him.
That's some of the best moments.
Well,
when things go wrong, it's sometimes the best thing about a play.
So that goes back to Jim's, you better rehearse and rehearse and
Yes.
rehearse.
Mhm.
That wouldn't have happened at my high school.
Sophia also asked, do you have thoughts on things like ghost tours around cities and graveyards? Actually, that's a really cool question. More and more you're seeing these things called immersive theater. And I mentioned Sleep No More, which took place in this big building, this old warehouse in New York City. And the audience went room to room, and they could go in any order they want. And they interacted with the actors very, very closely. And again, it's playing this game. Is this real or is this pretend? So ghost tours are like that kind of immersive thing. And in a sense, they're like docents. Someone leads you through, and then you might have actors popping out of graveyards and things like that. Those are a lot of fun. And I think you're seeing that more and more. Of course, once we get past the pandemic, we'll return to those kind of things. But people are starved for those kind of interactive and immersive experiences. And you can create those kind of things almost anywhere. There's theater now just for one individual. It's a play for one person that's done in this like little booth in Times Square. Actually, they've done a lot of those kind of things. So yeah, I think those ghost tours can be really, really fun. And there's murder mystery dinners. You sit down and have dinner. Somebody's killed at dinner. Yeah, that's a really popular form too. I have friends who've made their living doing that kind of stuff because it's a good living.
It seems that if something is more likely to happen, it is more frightening. You know, I mean, some of these horror movies that are just so over the top, you're not all that frightened because you don't think that's ever going to happen. But it seems
it's a great point. Like I said, you want to be on that close line between pretend and real. And if it's outside the laws of physics, I mean, we have an intuition about what can and can't happen. So you're exactly right. The closer it is to reality, the scarier it is because it could happen to you. But then we start getting away from horror, which is a kind of genre, and into suspense, which is a different, really kind of form. And that suspense plays much more on realistic threats. And it's not the world of the horror movie is a fantastical world. Things, the laws of physics don't quite apply. There are spirits and ghosts and supernatural, literally. Whereas in suspense, it's much more, all this can happen. Everything that, the laws of physics and the world is much more closer to our real world. Well, the world that we live in.
Yeah, if you're interested in some of the origins of what we now know scared us through, say, movies, go back and study German Expressionism, all right? And especially one of the first movies that was great using it, and that is a movie called The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. It was made in the 20s, German, so it's subtitled. It's a gem, all right? So go back, German Expressionism, look at pictures of it, and you all of a sudden realize that is our modern horror story. Okay, and those started, Hollywood stole from that in the early 30s and established that horror genre, and everything we have today was from that beginning in the early 30s in Hollywood, predominantly Universal Studios, those classic movies, Frankenstein, Wolfman, Dracula, Mummy, all those grew out of German Expressionism. Okay?
Josie says she's German. So am I, Josie.
Oh, there you go.
My father was born in Germany and was managed to escape in 1938. Just is very close.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a story for another day. Rosie asks, how do playwrights typically get their start and get their plays to directors and producers? I think they start at your age, writing now. And I know a lot of high schools will do one-act play festivals, original plays. But the best way to do it is write a play and get your friends to read it, you know, and just read it out loud. Because the essential thing for a playwright is to hear the words out loud in the mouths of human beings. And then you'll hear what feels true and then what feels maybe less true. And you just write a lot, write, and then read a lot of plays. Now, once you do that, then people are always looking for, every actor is looking for another part to play. So it's not hard to find actors to read your plays and to read them out loud. And then if you can't find a director, direct it yourself, though that's a different kind of game. But you don't have to get too fancy about it. And there are programs in Chicago and in different areas where young playwrights can actually get their plays produced professionally. So in New York, I know there's a group called the 92nd Street Y Project, and it finds high school students who write plays and then professional actors perform them. It's really cool. And there's a lot of programs like that in most of the major urban areas, Chicago, Los Angeles, Seattle, Atlanta, those kind of places. But the best way to get started is just to start and write a play. Start tonight. Then, of course, you can learn your craft as well. I mean, going to school and going to a writing program. You know, do you have to go to school to be an artist? No. Should you go to school? Yes. Because it'll enrich you. We, as artists, build on thousands of years of history, and we're part of an unending conversation. And so you want to be connected to that conversation, and the best way is to get educated about that conversation, not to recreate the past, but to build upon it, and maybe learn something from it too. And not to say you must imitate the past, or we almost bow down to Shakespeare. Shakespeare's a guy, he put his pants on one leg at a time, right? But you have something unique to say, because you're the only one in the universe ever who will be able to say what you have to say, who has your perspective. And that goes for any artist. So I encourage you to start writing the second you stop watching this. Write something down. And don't worry about it whether it's good or bad. Write. And then listen. And then you'll learn.
Another great thing to do on the university, for instance, is start taking those classes. Take an introduction to technical theater class, because there's a particular vocabulary that you will learn, as well as the techniques. All the kind of stuff that I did here today, it's covered in that basic overview class of like an introduction to technical theater. So do that. And same thing if you can get into an acting 1 class. If a theater department has acting for non-majors. Some do. See about that.
We do. So
Good. There you go.
And I was started as an actor, and I always wanted to be an actor. But when I went to Miami of Ohio as an undergraduate, a liberal arts program, I was in a technical theater class, and I had to take scene design. And I'm so glad I did, because a play I wrote that was directed by a friend of mine in New York City on 22nd Street at the Sanford Meisner Theater. We had a set designer, but he didn't have time, and we couldn't pay him to put the set up. He literally brought it in a pickup truck, dumped it on the floor, and said, okay, that's the set. And because I had taken class, I knew how to hang a curtain. I knew how to put together a flat. And so me and the crew, mostly me, put the set together. And it's only because, and I hung in focus lights, because that's what you did when you were a young man in New York and you're starting out, and you had a play you thought was kind of funny. And it ended up being pretty funny. And I was very proud of it. But it's because I had that background in theater, in technical theater, I was able to pull it off. And I think every artist does themselves a good service by having a comprehensive education. If you're an actor, you need to learn to work backstage. You have to respect your collaborators. And the same with the designers and the stage technicians. They need to get out on stage so they can appreciate and respect the work of the actor, because it is a team sport. There's no piece of the theater experience that isn't important. You know, you can't do it without everybody, all hands on deck. And just like a democracy. Anyway, it's getting to be towards 8 o'clock.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
How can I get a copy of this recording to share with my daughter? Judith?
Is my sound on?
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe each of you could give a final comment. Just your.
I want to answer Jessica's question about how would you give a haunted house a psychological twist, meaning that it would play with your mind more than your fear factor. Well, the way I would do it is create a narrative, that I would create a story to go with it. So I might have people come into a living room, and I would just start telling a story. You know, 20 years ago, something terrible happened in this room. And we have not, to this day, discovered what exactly it was. So to create a psychological terror is to create a narrative in someone's mind, to situate the person, both through the imagination, and that might be a way to give it a psychological twist. Just tell a good story. So, final words. I think I've said all the things that I need to say about art and science. I encourage you to never stop experimenting, to fool around and play, and recognize that every one of us are artists, every one of us are scientists. We specialize them to make a buck, but as human beings, we all have that capacity. All we have to do is say yes to it.
And as far as getting involved, start now. If there's a community theater group, join it. One of the first things you do, maybe it will be backstage. Great. Work backstage, because all the things we've been talking about here, they're part of community theater as well. And take classes from trained individuals, which is typically on your university level. Take workshops, all those town gown things that may go on, this kind of thing, okay? But develop that passion and seek out the people that can help you along, okay? Seek out that guy that designed the set for the community theater. And maybe you can assist him next time. Do the same thing with lighting or sound. All those things help create and enhance the theater production. So go for it. You have to go do it. No one comes knocking at your door. You have to go do it. And have fun. That's it.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dean Kassel and Jim Langley.
Mm-hmm.
It was a pleasure to have you with us this evening. It was just a really fun talk. Our next STEM Cafe will be virtual as well, and it is scheduled for November 18th The topic will be Board Game Renaissance, Leveraging Virtual Connections in a Time of Physical Distancing, and it will be at 6 o'clock as well. So that's a couple weeks from now. And again, this is part of our STEM Fest. We had a whole month of STEM Fest, but our Big Bash is going to be October 31st. And if you go to NIU's website and just put in STEM Fest, you can get the entire schedule, and you'll be able to sign up for the different sessions on Saturday. It's going to be all hands on deck for us. There's lots of fun things that will be happening in these virtual rooms. There'll be 4 virtual rooms, lots of activity, and a celebration stage. So Jeremy will be there demonstrating some of the things that he has done on our celebration stage at the Convocation Center. Excuse me. And I think somebody mentioned, how can we get a copy of this? And this is recorded this evening. And because we need to provide closed captioning for our audience, give us about a week before you see it. If you go to the STEM, type in STEM cafes for the NIU website, and then you will get to an area about all the upcoming STEM cafes, the past STEM cafes, and the recorded ones. And so we have recorded all of everything since March. So I think that you will enjoy that. And so it's, give us at least a week, but it could be as much as 2 weeks. And if you are interested in sponsoring an NIU STEAM Cafe, we really recommend that you take a look at this link or go to the NIU STEAM site and put in, and you can click on donate. We really would appreciate sponsorship of our community events. And we have STEM cafes year-round, at least once a month. And so and we also would love your feedback tonight. And here is the link. If you we would love feedback for all of the STEM Fest events. So if you go to our STEM Fest website, it will indicate there where you can put in an evaluation of some kind of any of the events that you went to. And again, thank you to our sponsors, Ideal Industries, ComEd, 3M, Nicor Gas, Thermo Fisher, First National Bank of Omaha, Mortensen, and the Suter Company. So we absolutely cannot be doing these events free for the community without your support. So we thank you for that. I also want to thank Aline Click, our NIU Director of Web Media and E-Learning, and her staff, Raz and Abdul Sarani. We could not have done this evening without you, and thank you very much. Thank you, our audience, for joining us. Please do provide your feedback, and I think that is it. I thought of one other thing to say. And you have something to say? Oh, okay. Thank you, audience. Bye-bye. Join us again on the 18th.